Hey guys, welcome back to Talking the Talkies. I'm Peter Waters, and for this week's video, I will be talking about all of those movies that I watched for the first time last month in May of 2021 that I recommend that I haven't already talked about in another video. So this is sort of the leftovers, and I have 14 movies I'm recommending here, and I'll tell you how you can watch them. So if you would like to check any of these out, if any of them strikes your fancy, know that it gets the Mr. Waters approval. The first movie on the list is Manos, Hands of Fate, frequently listed as one of the worst movies ever made by list makers everywhere. This movie's from 1966 and was first sort of rediscovered in the early 90s when the Mystery Science Theater 3000 TV crew sort of lampooned it on their Comedy Central show. And since then, it has gained sort of this ironic cult following who loves to make fun of the movie. The version I watched is on Tubi TV, and it's the Riff Tracks Live version, where actually pretty much the alumni of Mystery Science Theater 3000 made fun of the movie in front of a live audience, and it was hilarious. Also, there are 3 bonus shorts in front of this version of the movie. The first short is called Welcome Home Norman, and it's this very weird, bizarre comedy special about a guy who's experiencing all kinds of frustrations in an airport parking lot, and it's really cheesy. The next one is an old school commercial for prune juice. And then the last one is this children's film called Fun with Cylinders, because who needs an Xbox when you have the empty cardboard toilet paper tube when you've used up the roll? So it was really entertaining. The movie itself deserves half a star, but this Riff Tracks Live version I'm giving 4 out of 5 stars. I recommend it. Alright, the next movie is a little bit more highbrow than Manos, Hands of Fate. This is A Man Escaped from 1956. This is the art house jailbreak film from director Robert Bresson that sort of is the originator of the Shawshank Redemption in a way. It shows this Frenchman's escape from a Nazi prison in World War II, and it's his meticulous compiling of different resources to try to escape and not alert the guards. It's a very intense movie at times because there's very little in the way of music, so every little sound he makes, like crunching gravel or like scraping a door, every little sound could alert the guards. It's a very minimalist film. There's not like a lot of story necessarily, there's not a lot going on, but in terms of a technical filmmaking, it was really impressive, so I am giving that one 3.5 out of 5 stars. The next film on the list is called Wadjda, I believe you pronounce it, and it's a 2012 Saudi Arabian film, which is not a common country to see movies from. In fact, it wasn't until 2018 that movie theaters were legally allowed to be in Saudi Arabia. So this movie, the production of it alone, was this dangerous undertaking for the filmmaker, who was a woman who, if you know about this culture, women don't really have the same freedoms as men, so she had to direct the entire movie from inside of a van, talking to her actors through walkie-talkies. And pretty much this movie is this really sort of simple coming-of-age story about a young Saudi girl who desperately wants to ride a bike, but in her culture, that's not seen as appropriate for a young girl, so the whole movie is sort of her sort of mini rebellious nature trying to get a bike. And it's really simple, but it's really effective, and really underneath this seemingly simple coming-of-age story is this eye-opening expose of this country where women have almost no rights. It's almost like a real-life Handmaid's Tale in the country, and I just found it very fascinating. So I'm going to give that one 4.5 out of 5 stars. It's kind of a miracle that it was even made, and you can watch it on Netflix right now. Alright, next on the list is The Sons of Sam, A Descent into Darkness. Now this was actually my Mother's Day viewing this year. I watched it with my mom. We tend to bond over movies about murder and true crime. And this one is about this possible satanic conspiracy that there were other people than David Berkowitz who were involved in the Son of Sam murders. And in typical Netflix true crime doc fashion, it's very engaging. It's sort of formulaic at this point, but I'm giving it 3.5 out of 5 stars. It was an entertaining true crime story again. Alright, this next movie is a real hidden gem. It's called The Class of 1984, and I'm surprised it's taken me this long to have heard of this movie. This is sort of an exploitation movie spin on the inspirational teacher genre, like To Serve with Love, or Stand and Deliver, or Dead Poet Society, where the formula is there's a teacher who shows up to this like sort of rough classroom, and through their teaching they pretty much reform the students. But in The Class of 1984, you have this meek, mild-mannered music teacher who shows up to this inner-city school, and none of the tricks work, and the kids are psychotic, and one thing leads to another, and the movie eventually turns into Death Wish, only it's a teacher in the lead role. I thought that this was a great exploitation movie about the problems with delinquent youths in this country, and there's a lot of really interesting little nuggets in there for film fans. If you look in the cast, there's one Michael Fox, who would later become Michael J. Fox, famous from Back to the Future and other things, in one of his first movie roles. You have Lalo Schifrin doing the music, who famously composed the theme song to Mission Impossible. You have Alice Cooper doing the title theme song, and it has probably one of my favorite scenes that I've seen in a long time in any movie. Roddy McDowall plays the biology teacher in this, and there's one scene where he's had enough with these students. They, killed one of his animals, and he shows up to school with a gun, and basically that's the only way he can get them to do the work, is by pointing a gun at them, and it's very intense and hilarious in a very dark way. So I'm giving this movie 4 out of 5 stars. It is trashy, but the good kind of trashy. Next up is this movie called Profile, which is directed by one of the guys who made the movie Searching, which was one of my favorite movies of 2018. And similar to that movie, it's told entirely through computer screens. In Searching, it was about a father who was trying to find his lost daughter, who went missing. And in this movie, it sort of goes even deeper into this sort of cyber thriller, sort of offshoot of the found footage genre. It's about this UK journalist who is trying to uncover an ISIS recruitment ring on social media, so she poses as a Muslim, and she sort of insinuates herself into these ISIS chat boards, and it's really fascinating, and it shows how social media is so impactful today for both good and evil. It's a really interesting movie, even if some of the characters make really bad decisions. The main character is supposed to be this undercover journalist, and yet constantly throughout the movie she is making boneheaded moves that would probably compromise her identity. So if you can get past that and just sort of turn off your brain in terms of good decision making in movies, I highly recommend Profile. It's 3.5 out of 5 stars for me. Next up is another true crime documentary called Seduced, Inside the Nxivm Cult. And this series on Starz is about the infamous sex cult that basically recruited all kinds of people who thought that they were going to change the world with this sort of program, but pretty much as you go further and further along into it, they start brainwashing people, and then, in the higher ups, it's all just these women who were brainwashed into becoming sex slaves. And it's this fascinating story told by some of the victims themselves, and it's pretty crazy story, and that's all I'll say about that. Alright, next up is an iconic romantic drama movie from 1970 called Love Story. This movie is where the famous line, "Love means never having to say you're sorry," comes from, and it stars Ryan O'Neal and Ali MacGraw as two young people who fall in love, but then drama ensues after that. It's sort of like a modern take on Romeo and Juliet that you've seen a million times, but the chemistry is really great in the film, and probably the standout is the musical score, which is one of the only Oscars it won for that year, even though it was nominated for 7 Oscars. The music is just iconic and amazing. I highly recommend going on YouTube and checking out the main theme from Love Story, because it's just this beautiful, sweeping music that just adds so much to the film. Because of the performances and the music, I'm giving this one 4 out of 5 stars. Alright, next up is a really trippy movie from 1973 from Mexican director Alejandro Jodorowsky called The Holy Mountain. Jodorowsky sort of entered the scene with this movie called El Topo, which started the midnight movie sensation in the 70s, where pretty much if you had these really offbeat, weird, surreal movies that you wouldn't show to normal audiences, they would show at midnight to basically stoners, and it sort of they developed this cult following because of that. And The Holy Mountain is considered Jodorowsky's masterpiece, and after watching the movie finally, I can understand why. It's this super ambitious film that's filled with surreal imagery, and it has the humble goal of trying to encapsulate all of humanity in one film. It talks about, problems with the government and religion and all kinds of deep, rich themes, but it does it in this dreamlike, drug-induced, trippy way that is kind of impressive, especially considering it was a low-budget film. It's pretty much wall-to-wall WTF moments. The closest thing I can think to describing it is almost like Monty Python's The Meaning of Life on acid. Even though it might have been a little bit too abstract for me to fully love it based on my personal tastes, I'm giving it 3.5 out of 5 stars, and it's definitely a must-watch for film fans. Alright, next up is a documentary called Final Account that is in theaters right now, and it interviews a bunch of former Hitler youths who are now, in their 80s and 90s, and they're reflecting on their childhoods and how normalized anti-Semitism was back then. The filmmaking itself for this documentary isn't the greatest, but the testimonies are priceless, so I would recommend, if you're really interested in World War II and the Holocaust history, it's definitely a good watch. Alright, next up is just a concert movie. I like Linkin Park, the band, and there's this concert movie that was on YouTube from 2008. So Chester Bennington was alive at this point, and he was in peak form. Everyone in the band is amazing. There's a cameo from Jay-Z in this one. And it's just a great concert movie. I give it 5 out of 5 stars. There's really nothing I have, no problems I have with it. If you like Linkin Park's music, you're going to like this concert. So I recommend that one. Alright, next up is Demon Slayer. This is the 26-episode anime series currently streaming on Netflix that's getting a ton of buzz. The movie sequel to this series is actually weirdly breaking all of these box office records, even during this sort of weird pandemic time we're in. It's one of the highest grossing 2D animated films of all time. It beat out Disney's Tarzan, and it's also one of the highest grossing Japanese films of all time. It's so weird why this would be. It's not necessarily a wide audience thing. It's this intense action series about all these, young people slaying demons, and they're very cool. It's very action heavy, but you have to have seen the show to understand the movie. But either way, I would recommend this series to any anime fan. It is kind of formulaic within the sort of hero's journey, typical anime series format, like in a Pokemon, only instead of capturing Pokemon, there are some really intense, cool demon fights. They're basically, zombies, only instead of the undead, they turn into these cool demons that all have kind of this single unique superpower in a way. And yeah, it's just a fun action series that I would recommend. I give it 4 out of 5 stars. Alright, the second to last thing I'll talk about today is The Plot Against America. This is an HBO miniseries from David Simon, who created The Wire, and this one is sort of an alternate history sort of series, very similar to The Man in the High Castle, and it imagines what would happen if Charles Lindbergh, the famous sort of celebrity pilot and infamous Nazi sympathizer, what if he became president of the United States as World War II was starting to ramp up. And we follow this one Jewish family, and they all have different reactions to what's going on, and it's this really fascinating series that has, unfortunately, a lot of parallels to today's world. If you watch this series, I would highly recommend after each episode, David Simon and HBO put out this podcast where he talks about a lot of those parallels to today, and it's really interesting. but the acting is really great. For some reason, this was sort of ignored at last year's Emmys, but it was a really great series. Winona Ryder hasn't been this good in a very long time, and John Turturro plays this really fascinating, complex character. He plays this Southern rabbi who is actually fighting for Charles Lindbergh to be nominated, sort of for his own weird self-interest, and he's hoping that Lindbergh himself will somehow make things better for the Jews, even though he has all these Nazi connections. So it's this sort of complicated portrait, and even someone like the Turturro character, who could be seen as a villain, is given these complex portrayals. So I would give that one 4 out of 5 stars. It was really engaging and thought-provoking. All right, and the final recommendation I have for this week is Bo Burnham's Inside, which just recently hit Netflix. This is a really intriguing comedy special / art piece where it pretty much takes place in Bo Burnham's room during the pandemic, and it's sort of him coming to terms with being stuck inside all this time. Because he's a comedian and he has nowhere to perform, he's sort of performing to no audience, just the camera, and you sort of see his slow descent into madness, and you see him, grappling with all the sorts of issues that we all sort of experienced during the pandemic, like feeling isolated, feeling claustrophobic, seeing how all the problems in the country were coming to light. And it's this really interesting comedy special that feels really profound in moments, and it's almost hypnotic. The music in it is really interesting. Sometimes the music feel like Lonely Island bits where it's like, sort of corny and funny, but then in other times it's like this emotional journey into the feelings we had during the past year. I would be surprised if any other comedy special comes close to matching this one, just for its sheer uniqueness. I give this one 4.5 out of 5 stars. It's really good, and I highly recommend it. Alright, so that's a wrap on all of my favorite first-time watches for the month of May 2021. If you liked this video, definitely feel free to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, leave a comment, whatever you want to do. And until next time, I'll see you later.